Hello, dear friends. We are sincerely glad to welcome you again. Today we will have a conversation with the esteemed Igor Mikhailovich Danilov.
Greetings.
Igor Mikhailovich, in the previous video you touched upon an interesting paradox that concerns everyone. Because on the one hand, every person strives for freedom and independence, and a human as personality understands that there should be no hierarchy in the world. But on the other hand, when a person is actually at the position of consciousness, an incessant fight for dominance can be seen in him. You said that this is due to the fact that our primary or secondary consciousness fights for the power of real, which is the most valuable currency in the universe. And our consciousnesses, both the primary and the secondary one, are interested in having authority not only over personality, but over other people too. For this very reason, the life of most people in this coarse material world is actually aimed at exalting themselves over each other and eating one another in terms of energy. If they do not understand the main thing, what is life is really given to a human for. In this regard, I would like to start our conversation with a question that we received from one of our viewers. It concerns people's interaction in this three-dimensional, coarse material world. The question is the following. When talking to a person, do we always steal his attention or not?
If you always steal it from your interlocutor, it means you are very lucky. Oftentimes we are also stolen from. This is normal, it's a natural process of energy exchange, I'll put it this way. But there are certain nuances here too. Let's take a simple example. Two people meet and talk. First of all, what do they spend? Time, life. Naturally, they exchange certain information, whatever it is, important, significant, insignificant, evoking or not evoking emotions. Even if they meet and try to talk about nothing special, there's still an energy exchange. Thus, if we look from the perspective of metaphysics, even if people behave extremely politely, there is still a competition between them and a fight for that very vril. Isn't this a natural process, so to say? It is natural from the perspective of metaphysics. Okay, let's consider this skeptically, because many people will say, how come? In fact, we can control it, we can give nothing and try to take away vril. Let's consider this with complete skepticism. When we meet with people, we have a conversation with them, whether a person is important, necessary or unnecessary, or is a simple meeting. We spend a certain amount of time, right? Right. This time won't return. Will it?
It won't.
It won't. In any case, we use vril, that is energy. Well, we talked a lot about it. It is the most valuable currency. Anyway, we try to compete for it. Even if we meet a person, we are not interested, but we cannot leave. And after we leave, and from the perspective of such serious skepticism, what energy can we talk about here? The question is, why do we actually feel very bad after talking to some people about nothing special? Or, there's another example, we were in a good, elated mood and all that. We were full of energy, then we meet someone, just say hello, talk for 2 minutes, and we feel like a squeezed out lemon, right? I mean, it's like our tanks have been completely drained. Who hasn't encountered that, friends? There are people, and as a rule, there always are. If there is a family, relatives, near and dear people and the like, there are people after meeting with whom the majority feels very bad. Why? A simple example. During the holidays, as a rule, family, relatives, friends, and so on get together. Always or oftentimes, if there is a certain number, let's say, more than 7 people, and just note, these are certain laws. If 7 or more people gather, there will always be someone who comes not in a very good mood. As a rule, the person is always like that. He may be quite sociable and normal, so to say. He lives in an elated mood, he is always nice, but he often incessantly talks about how bad he feels. Yet, after that person leaves, most people feel really exhausted. Who hasn't encountered such situations? Again, we go back to the magic of numbers, right?
7.
Yes, 5, 7 and more, and then there goes 9, 12. or more correctly, 9, 11, 12, and so on. Thus we come to a certain number of people. That is why 6 people can have a good time. Basically, all of them feel fine and have fun. They exchange energy with each other. As soon as 7 people gather, the picture is completely different. Why? Is that an interesting question?
It is interesting, very interesting.
It is. Generally speaking, all this is due, I would say, to a redistribution of the power of will. There are certain basic patterns. One might say practically laws. Certainly, situations may occur when we meet a person and we feel nothing at all. It's just uninteresting. We leave just the way we were when we met him, and we are not even interested in talking to him, even if he brings up an interesting topic. What do you think is the reason for that?
Probably we are equal in power.
Either it is equal, or let's say a person is weaker. There is simply nothing to take from him. Well,
Yet sometimes you meet with some people and it seems like, as it is said, you start feeling so good, you've unburdened your soul.
100%.
As it is commonly said, that is, you become filled, you literally gain sort of
You're
a
inspired.
resourceful state.
Right.
Yes, after talking to a person. So it turns out that you have basically stolen his attention.
It turns out, 100%, it turns out that your demon is stronger than his. Whereas when you meet with a weaker demon, so to say, you get filled anyway, but not you, your demon does. Although it can affect you emotionally as well.
Why is it that not all people's attention is of interest to us? I mean, if consciousness hunts for attention, then it would seem we can take attention from every person we meet on our way. Why does the attention of some people interest us, while the attention of others doesn't?
There are people who are filled, from whom, let's put it simply, and convert all this into an equivalent of money. There are people who are rich, and you can take more from them. There are people with average incomes, and there are poor ones. So when you meet a poor person, you even want to give something to him. And it's not a fact that you haven't already given. You see, that's also one of the forms of manipulation. In general, this is an interesting topic. If we delve into it, we can see a distinct hierarchy. It is indeed a very distinct hierarchy. In our world, everything is fractally structured. If we move away from metaphysics and switch to the visible world, after all, here there is also a sheer aspiration of people to dominate each other. Why? What urges people? Some will say the higher we rise on the social ladder, the more authority we have. The greater our opportunities and importance are, the more we are envied.
Freedom,
Right.
sort of independence, yes.
Freedom, of course, plus financial well-being, it goes without saying. And our aspiration to rise in authority over others is caused by banal greed and desire for a better life. No, friends. It's just that the higher a person climbs up the hierarchical ladder, the more access he has to other people's vril. I mean, it's again a pursuit of that very vril. Let's take another look. Let's suppose there is a person whom you've known all your life. He is nice and wonderful. He has been destined to gain a certain authority. Does he change?
He changes.
He changes. And the higher he climbs up the hierarchical ladder, the more authority he has over other people and the greater the number of people he communicates with, the deeper and faster he changes. Even if, let's say, a person used to be the life of the party, he was a simple and interesting person and suddenly he gets to the top of power, what happens to him?
He becomes serious and meticulous. He starts valuing his time and attention.
Let's say, the one who...
Often people terminate relationships with the circle they used to have before.
It is clear that a person can terminate relationships with some people. He has a great responsibility, he cannot communicate with many.
Yes, exactly.
But all this is a visible part, while in actual fact, what happens? A person changes very quickly, and not for the better.
He is pragmatic.
Even the one who, let's say, used to love and respect people who took care of nearly all humanity, used to be a volunteer and served humankind. If he becomes a president, he'll become a tyrant. The thief, a tyrant, a corruptionist, and so on. What he used to fight against, perhaps his entire life. Why? Because of the power of vril and the demon. As soon as a demon is endowed with authority, the main thing for him is vril. And the main thing is what? To evoke as much emotion in people as possible. He's not interested in anything else.
Right, and it turns out that many of such people basically show and demonstrate their lives some kind of grandstanding.
Of course they do.
As soon as they become a little bit higher, one step higher in the hierarchy.
Okay, Let's take a look. Let's just take bloggers, okay? Many of them start bragging about their achievements, their wealth, how many donations, how much money people transfer to them. Some of them buy themselves Rolls Royces and everything like that. In your opinion, what do they do that for?
It's a hunt for real, for attention.
Well, I understand. If a person bought himself a Rolls Royce, he earned money, that's his right. He can. If he has an opportunity to drive a good car, why not drive one? Life is very short, right?
Yes, exactly.
It makes sense. Why expose it all? Why talk about this? Why tell and brag about how many donations you received and how much money someone sent you? What gifts they sent you, right? I mean, what for? In order to stir people up, to cause envy, and to stimulate them. Do you know what the paradox is? The more and more often this blogger, whoever we take, friends, brags about his income, show how much he gets, the more people will send him funds. Take note. Why?
It means that he's stronger than them, he's better than them, he has more energy, and people pay more attention to him.
Firstly, his demon is stronger, and he gives orders to the weaker ones.
Wow.
And when a weaker demon sees how the stronger one praises someone, the little demon wants to be praised by the bigger demon. This is really so.
Igor Mikhailovich, and what role does the dominance of either primary or secondary consciousness in a person play in the hierarchy of this world?
A great one. Primary consciousness, let's put it so, it shows the weakness of a demon. There cannot be a strong demon with a dominant primary consciousness as a rule. Secondary consciousness, well, a demon of secondary consciousness, let's put it this way. Friends, pardon the language. It may sound science fictional or metaphysical to you, but this is reality. If you start working on yourselves and pay a little bit attention to such trifles. So, the demon of secondary consciousness is able to develop, one may say, up to infinity. But if a person is firmly dominated by primary consciousness and the primary one controls the secondary one, then this person will always be at the bottom of the social hierarchy. In other words, it will be extremely hard for him to rise. But he will be envious, angry, mean, or sometimes on the contrary, he will be a flatterer. It doesn't matter, this goes from one extreme to another. But whatever he is, he will never rise.
What about the following question, Igor Mikhailovich? A little bit earlier, we were talking about bloggers. It so happens that bloggers, and this is the era of bloggers now, they actually demonstrate their lives, they say. Take everything from life, seize the day, and it seems that a person is such a narcissist, an egoist, who is in love with himself, and
Sheer
so on.
primary consciousness.
And from a side, it seems that it is sheer primary consciousness. How does he actually manage
to gather millions of viewers, I'll put it so, right?
Yes, exactly.
It is very simple. This suggests that his secondary consciousness is developed quite strongly. It dominates, but it shows and imposes on the primary consciousness of his viewers that he is the same as they are, but they feel, again, at the level of already, let's say, unconscious perception, they feel the power of his demon of precisely secondary consciousness. This person is just playing. He creates an image of being the same as them, and look, millions of people get hooked on such people.
Right.
They listen to them with open mouths, they consider them smart, and almost as very close friends. While in fact, if we look at what such bloggers create, never mind in the past, those were kings, whoever, warlords, famous, popular people who could act as speakers and the like. And they also had a circle of kind of devoted fans, speaking in modern terms.
Yes, exactly.
Yet what happens? After all, this person already subconsciously, at the level of his demon, forms an army of slaves for himself. Later on, when he becomes a subpersonality, they will become subpersonalities too. If, for example, friends, this is reality. No matter how much your consciousness doubts and tries to avoid this subject now, I will repeat once again, this is absolute reality, and it is worth pondering over. Why is a whole army being formed? In order to live better after death. And just look, a modern blogger, whom people watch, if he disappears for several days, People begin to worry about him like a near and dear person.
There is panic, right?
Those who became addicted to certain bloggers. Haven't you observed such a phenomenon in yourselves, friends? If you have observed it, that's your trouble. Why? Because you are signing up to be donors for that blogger. Meanwhile, the way of contact doesn't matter. Present-day digital technology ensures a direct connection, and even such a concept as video recording or something else doesn't break the connection with a particular demon, so to say.
Hence, direct communication with a person is not needed.
It's not.
Is it?
It's not needed. Moreover, people sympathize, they worry and recall him during the day. They already give their will directly to that person. Again, if his demon, a secondary consciousness, if he is quite developed, capable of certain development, so to say, and at the unconscious level he knows the laws of redistribution of that very vril at least a little bit, then he will develop his success further. Yet sometimes it surely happens that a demon develops, creates a field for manipulation, but someone eventually steals from him. There is a Raja for every Vijay, especially in the world of hierarchy or in the world of shadows where the competition is quite fierce.
People shouldn't expect a decent attitude towards each other.
Right, it's unrealistic. You know, they're only cheaters. Therefore, let's just say,
It turns out when
you should be careful even with bloggers and all the rest. I'm not saying you shouldn't watch them. You will watch them anyway. But you should be aware of what you give away. As a matter of fact, even if we take short videos by bloggers, which are regularly released, people await them. They worry, they are simply curious. And here's the reasoning. Why do you watch someone else's life? You have your own. Build and take care of your own life, right? I understand it when there are some master classes, exchange of experiences, a person develops intellectually, or for instance,
something that will improve one's life.
absolutely right, when you can take someone else's experience and apply it in your life.
Yes, exactly.
But when you look and there is an idle pouring from one empty glass into another, nothing is filled. A person just goes around and talks about the way he lives. Yet he gets so stuck in people's minds. People become so dependent, like drug addicts. But why?
Yes, many say, I watch him for the fifth time. Neither secondary nor primary consciousness can explain why I'm stuck to some person, scene or video all the time, while it turns out that a person understands that there is a strong demon there, and at a different level, bypassing consciousness
Certainly.
and bypassing some of one's understanding
Of
and
course.
logical comprehension.
The person, the viewer already becomes simply his slave. He becomes dependent on his demons, not on his charisma or mastery of presentation. No, sometimes you look and indeed there is primary consciousness. A blogger is kind of silly, unserious, and even a little bit insane. But people are addicted to him, in the literal sense of the word.
Igor Mikhailovich, based on the kind of content a person enjoys, is it possible to identify what kind of consciousness predominates in him?
Easily. For example, again, as we have just discussed, a person has an ordinary simple life, no matter who he is. Whether he goes to work, he's a lawyer or someone else, or, well, if he's a lawyer, we immediately understand that he's dominated by secondary consciousness. Let's put it simply, there is an ordinary person, and his job is blogging. He goes shopping, buys something, cooks something at home, plays with his favorite dog, watches TV and comments. And people watch him watching TV and commenting, you see? There's the level of which consciousness, the primary one, right?
Right.
Next, cats running around, some chuckles where you don't have to think and don't have to strain yourself. Is it the primary one?
Primary consciousness.
Of course. But there are other videos which, let's say, tell about outer space or some historical things, that is, what primary consciousness doesn't like. It is boring. But it hooks secondary consciousness. There is something to think about, something to analyze and to learn. That's already, pardon me, secondary consciousness, right?
Yes. Igor Mikhailovich, what about videos about spiritual matters, for example? Why do some videos become popular on the internet while others do not?
It depends here too. Let's say if a person really proceeds from a pure heart with a spiritual message, then, excuse me, this isn't real. If a person really, let's say, gives a direct message, he himself is really on the spiritual path and everything comes from the soul, then what comes, as they say, from the soul is a much purer fraction. Where will it go?
To the soul.
To personality.
From a soul to a soul.
To the soul. From a soul to a soul, yes. To personality. And personality will be strengthened by that. Many people feel it. Those who feel exactly a direct effect of spiritual powers of them as personalities, let's say, through the screen, and this strengthens them, which does what? It weakens consciousness, both the primary and the secondary one, in relation to people's personalities. Hence, consciousness is not interested in that. It will push it all away and reject, simply like…
It's a loss for it.
Simply like a flame, of course, you see? Whereas if people babble nonsense, again, in that very spiritual aspect that they might narrate, well, let's say the classics of modern religious worldviews, without the spiritual content of the speaker himself. That's where people might gather en masse. Why? Because it's a play of demons, meaning empty talk. Such videos may become very popular.
I see. Igor Mikhailovich, here is another question. If it is so happens that you find yourself in a circle of people or in a group where you definitely see that a person is stealing your attention, is there any safety measure for those people who truly follow the spiritual path? What is the proper way to behave?
I will tell you this.
What is to be done?
If people have just embarked on the spiritual path, they don't have perception through feelings yet, but they are trying to develop. The best way to protect themselves is inner peace. Concentrate on the spiritual, on the lotus practice. Let's say, if a person belongs to some religion, it's enough to focus on a prayer, a sincere prayer to God. And let's say his interlocutors become disinterested.
That is, you keep up the conversation, right? I mean, consciousness.
You keep up the conversation. Nobody can see that from the outside, but you direct all the power of your attention, all the power of your will exactly to the soul. What will happen? The transmission of will doesn't go to the demons of the interlocutor, and they become very bored. So they start fidgeting and interrupt the conversation.
The conversation winds down, right?
As a rule, yes.
Igor Mikhailovich, it turns out that basically human life here in this material world and learning something is, in fact, directly related to figuring out the best cases from those who steal real and instilling them in oneself. Because many people say, so who am I? While in fact, if you don't know, you are a set of cases, you copy the behavior of people whom you once liked,
Sure.
meaning some of their habits, behavior patterns, their way of life, because consciousness tells you that they have more power.
Again, mirror neurons work. Why? Let's say those who watch certain bloggers start copying them without even noticing that, because a weaker demon is trying to repeat everything, especially the exterior, the voice, the manner of presentation and whatnot, to emulate his idol, that is, a stronger demon. Thus, he tries to learn, sort of to grow, to become stronger, and to dominate other people. This is very simple. Again, a question may arise from people. Okay, there is the real power, meaning it is constantly being released. That's what we pay for living in this three-dimensionality, so to say. But what if you don't meet with anyone? Well, it happens that people, for example, decide not to meet with anyone for a week.
They decide not to meet with anyone in order to save real.
Yes, even for that,
Yes.
to save it. Will you save it or not? My friends, what do you think? Imagine, in order for you not to waste your will, you reduce
Communication.
time. Yes, you reduce communication, time of conversing with your friends, even via the phone and so forth. And you try to redirect it to the spiritual world. That's a good thing, right? I mean, to your spiritual development. That's great. But will you then spend your will on the system, on consciousness? Whatever, even on your own one. Of course you will. Why? Because consciousness will flood you with pictures. The most interesting thing here is that consciousness can produce anything. Again, conversations with prominent famous people. If you don't have a blogger you are talking with, consciousness will make things up for you and elevate you. I mean, what is the danger here? If you don't load your consciousness heavily with something serious, then a game begins, and here the advantage goes to primary consciousness. The system starts pressing on a person's pridefulness. And since primary consciousness is closer to personality, it begins to coax attention through fantasies. At this point, a combination of the work of both primary and secondary consciousness already takes place. Secondary consciousness urges primary consciousness to start a dialogue. We, as personalities, sometimes don't even distinguish whether a real person is talking to us or it's a fantasy of secondary consciousness.
Yes, that's right.
We don't care as personalities. Yet what does primary consciousness begin to form? Elementary, simple things. How an ordinary person all of a sudden starts talking to his idol. Then he may talk to the president. Moreover, as his friend. That is, it elevates the person. Primary consciousness always seeks to elevate itself above people. Why? Again, even up to the point where you talk to presidents, you tell them something, they listen to you, meaning they give you their will. So imagine, to what extent?
Even though in an illusory way, yet it builds such schemes.
Of course.
It substitutes reality.
Of course, while in fact what happens is that instead of sending your will towards the spiritual world, creating, ensuring the future eternal life for yourself, you just waste your life on these illusions and revel in some illusion, so to say, because of momentary pridefulness. By the way, this often happens, my friends. Even if a person is distracted, well, he is into some sweet illusion, I don't know, of talking to his idol. It doesn't matter who he is, a boxer, a politician, an entertainer, but the main thing is that he talks to him, he dominates him, and takes away his will, and this very illusion of receiving will, which for personality is actually like an illusion of elevation, of some growth, is nothing but deceit. In general, this division of primary and secondary consciousness is very interesting, I would say. And as we already said, the trouble is that true talents and abilities of every human being are sometimes hidden by primary consciousness, and secondary consciousness is underdeveloped. Why does it not develop? A simple question. What do you think?
Perhaps a person himself doesn't develop
The primary doesn't let it develop.
Similarly, by looking at such bloggers, he basically activates primary consciousness in himself.
Quite right.
The person recollects the past.
Definitely.
It turns out that primary consciousness is also connected with the memory block.
100%.
Yes, so a person lives in the past.
It would seem that the past is… There should be past experience that you've gained and you move on, you don't hold on to the past. But people are often thrown into the past, often forced to live somebody else's life, to worry about someone, again, to live in an illusion of their own consciousness, but not to develop and live by themselves. However, for example, if secondary consciousness predominates in a person, as a rule, he finds himself, he fulfills himself, he develops. I mean here, in the field of talent, I don't mean in the hierarchy. Still, it is rather primary consciousness that pushes a person to develop in the hierarchy. But it is good when, let's say, there is at least some harmony between primary and secondary consciousnesses, then a person can be smart, competent, and hold a corresponding position. Yet most often, let's say, there are people who are really greedy, thievish, sycophantic, and stupid, who really don't have any skills in their specialty at all, but nevertheless can occupy a high post. Why? It is due to primary consciousness. The demon grows so strong that it begins to dominate even secondary consciousnesses. Still, when we meet each other, what is the first thing that activates? It is primary consciousness in both interlocutors. Afterwards, yes, secondary consciousness activates, there is analysis and everything else, but the first impression is given by primary consciousness. And if the demon of primary consciousness is strong enough, he is able to suppress secondary consciousness in his interlocutor, leaving it to the interests of primary consciousness. Thus, I'll put it this way, someone who walked in off the street to some big boss can become a good friend of his in literally 2 minutes, to the point where the boss will remember him and they will meet, be friends, have a career and so forth. Or there will be trivial corruption, let's say, again, banal selfish matters that improve their lives. That is why the development of secondary consciousness suffers, although, in theory, The demon of secondary consciousness should be much stronger and should dominate. Why? Because it is connected to the system itself directly, while primary consciousness is only partially.
Igor Mikhailovich, is it true that if a person's secondary consciousness is developed, then there are more of some talents and creativity in him?
Of course, there are more of them. Primary consciousness restrains a lot. Actually, it is more, it loves glory. If, let's say, primary consciousness doesn't dominate the secondary one too much, it may contribute to the development of these talents in secondary consciousness. As a rule, if a child grows up as an egoist, then, besides selfishness, there arises laziness in him and an ability to shift responsibility onto someone else. Thus, a person's talents are suppressed. Again, we know that there are humanists and there are techies. Everyone has heard about this.
Yes.
So many people say, I'm a humanist. I'm not good at technology. I don't understand your mathematics and your physics.
Yes, exactly.
Or on the contrary, he says, I'm a techie. I'm interested in physics, but I don't understand your poetry.
Yes, it is true.
I'm not good at it. But do you know that this is actually a lie? And now, friends, I'll disclose a piece of information. There was an interesting experiment. My friend and I conducted certain experiments with regard to his work, using the hypnosis technique on those who volunteered. We took purely humanists, a certain group of people, and, say, under a specific hypnosis technique, primary consciousness was suppressed and replaced by a hypnotist, let's say. A command was sent directly to personality that a person becomes that very techie, meaning he likes mathematics and everything else. Do you know what the most interesting thing is? Those humanists activated secondary consciousness to such an extent. Well, for example, I'll tell you figuratively now. Other names were used. For example, a person was suggested that he was Tsiolkovsky, a scientist. And the most interesting thing is that the person started talking almost like that very Tsiolkovsky.
Not having any experience.
Not having any. And that is very interesting. In other words, our secondary consciousness really has a huge database of knowledge. And it is absolutely the same for it whether a person is a humanist or a techie. This shows that it is enough just to replace this egoist who says, I am a humanist.
He has defined and identified himself,
Yes.
established his own boundaries.
Absolutely right, completely right. You present personality as another personality with completely different characteristics, and those characteristics begin to manifest themselves. From the perspective of modern explanation, I don't know, from the perspective of neurobiology or something else, that's impossible. It is practically unrealistic. That is, if a person is a humanist, he knows very little about that very Tsiolkovsky, so to say, or whoever we take. Yet, in this case, he suddenly starts voicing his speech. I understand that psychologists may say that all of us, especially humanists, read a lot, come across or read something somewhere. Some phrases are stored in our mind, and then our memory gets activated. In a certain state, especially in the state of hypnotic immersion, so to say, and everything is activated in a person, and everything that was associated with that very Tsiolkovsky begins to come to mind.
To be structured, yes.
Of course.
To be sifted through.
Yes, all the more so if he already perceives himself as that very Tsiolkovsky, right? And everything falls into place for him. I agree, such things may happen from the perspective of psychology, but try to repeat it in reality. Here's a simple example. If a person doesn't know and is not familiar with something, if he doesn't have the mind of a mathematician, as modern psychologists and psychiatrists say, then he is not inclined to serious, profound calculations. He wasn't able to do that. Well, in this case, 2 minutes after he has been immersed and substituted with a personality, well, personality not in the sense of personality of a human, but in the sense of his ego. In this case, it is the primary consciousness. Then the person, excuse me, he begins to understand very well both mathematics and completely different sciences of which he had no idea before. And indeed, when you talk to him, you get the impression that you are really talking to a doctor of mathematics at the very least, you see. But he's a humanist, and others acquired completely different skills too.
A mathematician.
Of course. We took mathematicians, physicists, guys who seriously liked that, studied it and so on, but they were not good at humanities. They didn't even know Pushkin's poetry. But when we conducted those manipulations, so to say, with their psyche and replaced this egoist inside them, they began to recite poems by heart. Moreover, they could easily compose and write them. Another simple example, a person who was an athlete, let's say, a good, talented athlete, but it was clear that he was not good at sciences, either at humanities or at exact sciences.
He didn't devote time to it, yes.
An absolute zero. Moreover, he certainly wasn't into poetry. But do you know what the most interesting thing is? When his personality was substituted, he began to write poetry. There was a substitution with the personality of Anna Akhmatova. He began to compose and create absolutely the same poems.
The style was the same.
Everything was the same. But excuse me, he is an athlete, a good one at that, who didn't study well, let's put it so. He didn't read anything, any of her works. The most interesting thing is that after he was taken out of the trance and returned to his normal boxing state, we tried to talk to him about those poems. He didn't even know the author. He had never read any of her works, never heard them. He may have heard them, but he didn't remember. And he couldn't repeat anything. But when we gave him poems written in his handwriting, he simply did not believe us. If it hadn't been for witnesses, he wouldn't have believed us for sure.
In other words, consciousness knows what to retrieve in exchange for real
Of course.
from the library called the Absolute or the Universal Mind.
There is the universal mind, let's put it this way.
It's just that, a lot of people also think as follows. I am not a strategist. I am more of a tactician. I am not creative. I am more of an executor.
And here, of course, but you've just said the key point, I. Until a person answers the question who he is nobody. He's just a trivial me person, you see?
Yes.
Who passes by the greatest knowledge, who passes by life, who passes by God's love indeed, simply because he's a me person. From primary consciousness, in other words, he's a petty demon who spoils his own life and condemns himself to a bad afterlife. Though he could become anyone, just knowing and understanding elementary things, that the only thing which stands in your way is your pridefulness, your overinflated ego. This is, excuse me friends, your primary consciousness. A human can achieve anything, including good spiritual accomplishments and spiritual freedoms, and become anyone, if he certainly has an aspiration and desire.
That's the most important point, to become a mature personality.
Meanwhile, everything on the spiritual path begins simply with love. So friends, let us love each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Igor Mikhailovich.
Thank you, friends. Peace be with you.